This tutorial will introduce basic line work for drafting in AutoCAD. In this tutorial, we're going to trace over some existing infrastructure on an aerial. This will become the bones of a base map of this particular site. We're going to look at this building, in particular, a residence hall on the campus of Mississippi State University. The first step is creating a starting line that will, frankly, become the basis for all of the other geometry. And setting this first line is incredibly important because it sets that precedent for the orientation. For that reason, we're going to use a long line across this building. We'll select this particular area on the roof. And using our line command, L space, we'll click a line from one point of this roof line to the other. We can adjust that with the grips by selecting the line and moving those grips to a more precise location. Now, what we're going to use this line for is to offset and create all the other lines that are on here. We'll create new lines and use snaps to make perpendicular lines to this. When you're creating buildings, it's good practice to use consistent and whole numbers in your offsets. For that reason, the first thing we're going to do is actually determine the distance that we want to offset this line. And it's roughly 30 feet. We'll use our offset command, just O space, type in 30 feet, and offset that line in either direction. Now, as mentioned, we'll create a new line and use our snaps to go from endpoint to endpoint. To verify that your snap's on, you can click the O snaps icon down here, or the shortcut is F3. You can also see which O snap settings are on by clicking on the down arrow next to the O snaps here. We'll simply create a line using L space, snap from this endpoint to this endpoint. Now in this case, the snap is showing up with the perpendicular snap, which will work just as well since these were offset from the same line. We'll continue to use the distance and offset command to create additional line work for these other more nuanced areas of the building. We'll simply type in distance, zoom in, and check what this offset will be. Roughly 5.5 feet. Make that 6 in this case, and offset that line. Now, depending on the precision of your base map, in this case we've got a fairly large site, it would be okay to be a little more rough with this, or if precision matters greatly in this particular case, you can change it to 5.5 feet. We'll then find the center line for these two pieces right here. We offset this other side. What we'll do is with our near snap on, you can see that it's showing up right here. If it's not showing up for you, there's a couple ways you can change that. You can check and uncheck nearest right here. I will uncheck it because another way is simply to type in L space for line and then NEAR, and it will prompt the near command and only the near command or near snap to come on. We'll click here, go all the way across to the other side. Now in this case, it's going to be incredibly important that the perpendicular line is on. As you remember, we are basing everything off of this initial line that we created. So in this case, we want to make sure that the perpendicular snap comes on. In the same case, we can type PER as the shortcut for perpendicular, or if your perpendicular snap is already toggled on in your O snap settings, it will show up automatically. We'll offset this line as well, determining the distance by simply doing the distance tool. We'll click. I'll say nearest to this line. It's roughly 17 feet. Offset this line 17 feet in either direction. Now the last tool we're going to talk about is the mirror tool. What this will allow us to do is to create a line right here. We'll do near, about right here, to this intersection. Now in this case I could simply draw that line again, but just for the sake of showing the mirror command, what we'll do is select this line that we want to mirror. We'll type MI, and then we have to specify the mirrored line. In this case, it's going to be this line right here. I'll toggle back on my nearest snap, and I'll click two places on this line, right here, and just another place further up. Now it'll ask me if I want to erase the source object. That means if I want this line to be erased when it creates this mirror line. Sometimes that might be the case for you. In this case, my answer is no. I could just hit spacebar to accept the default, which is no, or in space in that case. The the last thing I might want to do in this case is to actually trim some of the line work in this drawing. Obviously, using the offset command, I have some overhanging pieces right here. So what I'll do is I'll type TR, which is my trim tool. Now the first setting is it says select objects. The way I like to think of these objects are select the blades in the scene by which to cut. In this case, I'm going to choose this one and this one. At this point, we can trim lines based on these blades. So in this case, I can click this line right here. It will trim, and this line. Just hovering over it in AutoCAD 2015, and later it gives you a preview of what that trim will actually do. Now, I'll undo that command and talk about another way to use the trim tool, which is a little more, as I like to call it, reckless, but it becomes very helpful when you want to do something very quick. And that's simply to hit TR for trim. Instead of selecting any objects, or as I call them, any blades in the scene, you'll simply hit spacebar again. When this happens, it actually makes everything a blade in the scene. So in this case, I can click on either side of the line, and it still works as I need it. You can also see that everything, because it's a blade, I can trim here, here, all of these pieces, allow me to cut as needed. I'll continue some of these basic commands. We'll move ahead in the scene to introduce a couple more commands. Some other tools in drafting that might be helpful are using the move and copy command. They work very similar. In the case of move, it simply moves the objects that you have selected. In the case of copy, obviously it is copying that line work to a new location. In this case, what we want to do is grab this line work right here, and we want to copy it from its current place and move it right over here. Now I've gone ahead and created this guideline that is exactly where I want to put these pieces right here. So what we'll do is we'll type CO for copy. I'll grab any point on these lines, and I'm going to move them and snap it perpendicular. I can see that my perpendicular snap is on, but again, if it hadn't come on, I could simply type PER, and it will default to only perpendicular. I'll then click. I can continue copying these pieces around, but simply being done with it now, I can hit escape. I'll then remove this source line and trim a little bit more line work. Another tool that might be helpful is the fillet tool. Now the fillet tool is traditionally used to put a radius at the point of intersection of two lines. We could, in a traditional sense, type fillet, set the radius to 5 feet, and curve that line. Obviously in this case I don't need any curved pieces on my building, so I'll hit F for fillet, R for radius. I'll set the radius to 0, and then simply click these lines, and it does the trimming for me. And this is fairly easy. By just hitting spacebar, I can continue to work my way around the building for any offsets that I have like that. So these are some basic tools that will help you get started putting line work on an AutoCAD plan. As mentioned, in this case, it's tracing existing infrastructure on an aerial that was brought in from Google Earth to begin the foundations of a base map.